Well, I think it has in a way that some of the reviews and in abroad and in other places have been a lot more laudatory. And the initial shock of the New York Times, Washington Post, New Yorker, and then especially the Never Trump right, who said that I was a racist or Trump is Hitler and I was a Nazi. That's kind of died down now. I think. I don't think. I replied to some of it, but I don't think it. And then the fact that the book, it's been on the bestseller, New York Times bestseller every week. So that kind of silenced a little bit of it.
I finished a few weeks ago, the Second World Wars, and I just pulled it off the shelf the other day because, in preparation for this, I wanted to take a look through a little bit of that book as well. And that's the first time I realized on the reviews on the Dust Jacket is a review by Max Boat. And I thought, will he be writing a review again for you at this point?
No, I don't think so. I've known him for 20 years, and he's made a 180-degree flip, not just Never Trump, but now he's hard left. So he's changed his lifestyle. I mean, he divorced. He has a new left wing. I mean, it's a holistic process for him. That's what I gather. I don't want to infer that I know for a fact, but he seems to have culturally, socially, politically gone from right to left.
People are missing the point of the case for Trump. You're looking at, as a historian, at some of the reasons that he became president and really what led up to that. Am I right on that count?
Yeah, I did. I had a different title than the publisher. It was Trump Examined, or What Created Trump, and they thought it wouldn't be edgy enough. But 2/3 of the book are socioeconomic, cultural analysis of why Trump saw an opening in a way that either the Republican establishment or the Clinton forces did not, and how that agenda was targeted to the key states of the Electoral College. And he added a wrinkle to that. People misunderstand and think that he was an apostate from the Republican Party. Most of his positions on tax reduction or energy production or constructionist judges or increase the defense were boilerplate Republican. But where he differed was the adversarial approach to China, the idea that trade can't be free unless it's fair, and closing the border, and then avoiding optional military engagements that don't translate tactical victory on the ground into strategic advantage. And that message, along with the idea that the hollowed out interior was not fated to be, it was a byproduct of globalization that could be corrected by symmetrical trade policy. That was what I think distinguished him from both the Republicans and Hillary, and more importantly, appealed to people that, I don't know what we would call them, the Reagan Democrat, the parole voter, the Tea Party voter, the 5 to 8 million in Wisconsin, Pennsylvania, Michigan, Iowa, Ohio, North Carolina, that had either not voted in 2012 and 2008 or had voted for Barack Obama. And by massaging that message, he got them to come out, and then he won very, very narrow margins. And even that was kind of controversial because everybody said, well, he only won Michigan by 80,000 or only won Wisconsin by 70, but they forget that he got millions of people to come out that otherwise had not come out for Republican because they were so far behind in those states. It was quite stunning that he could ever flip them, given the past two elections.
A lot of the discussion I've heard over the last few years about this is one camp says he stumbled into this success. The other says he's a very shrewd man, and he was able to take advantage of it. Which one of those do you think is closer to the truth?
Well, I think he's very shrewd. I think why people misinterpret him or underestimate him is they have a particular sense of decorum or establishment protocol, and they don't understand that not only do most Americans not follow that, but more importantly, they're tired of it. And so what Trump was saying is, I can be empathetic and coarse, and they didn't think that was possible. And I guess the existential question he posed to people, what's ethical, getting 3% GDP or record low unemployment for minorities or record energy production that changes the lives of many people while at the same time, calling Stormy Daniels horseface or pencil neck for Adam Schiff, versus mellifluous tones like Obama or Mitt Romney, but not having a program or a paradigm that can do that. And that's what people can't figure out about him, that he can go into West Virginia and say, I love big, beautiful coal. And Hillary Clinton can go there in 2016, say she wants to shut down the industry and put coal workers out of a job. And so I think that's what people felt, that he was genuine and he was empathetic, that he didn't change his accent depending on the audience in which he spoke. He didn't have the fake twang or the fake flannel shirts and jeans like most politicians when they go to state fairs. His tie, hair, tan, Queen's accent was, whether he was in Tulare, California or Indiana, he was the same.
I have a friend who grew up in Philadelphia, and one of his uncles was a bodyguard for Frank Rizzo. And my friend grew up reading National Review, was a devout conservative, but he was telling me early on that Trump had an appeal like Rizzo had an appeal, and he could talk to regular people. And there's a lot of comparisons: Trump to Teddy Roosevelt, Trump to Andrew Jackson. Somehow, though, it still comes back to that ability that he could walk into a room and just have a conversation with anybody there in that genuine sense.
Yeah, I think that's true. It reminds me of Harry Truman, in the sense that Truman had very little experience. People thought Truman couldn't do the job. He was the only modern president that did not graduate from college. He only had a semester. And then he did things that were impulsive. He dropped the bomb, created the CIA, recognized Israel, went into Korea, fired MacArthur, flipped on Roosevelt's appeasement of the Soviet Union, and created the Cold War, really, and containment. And he was very coarse. He swore. He was petty. He went after a critic that had criticized his daughter Margaret's singing debut. But he went out of office very unpopular, but people felt that at that particular time, Roosevelt doctrinaire liberalism just wasn't going to save the Democratic Party any longer. It had run out of ideas. So he's a character like that, and I tried in the book to reference Westerns or Greek tragedy or Dirty Harry type movies of the outsider who comes in with a certain skill set, solves problems, but doesn't get the benefit of being acknowledged as a problem solver, because the methodologies he used, or once they start to work, people have the luxury of saying, wow, I don't want to be contaminated by that, or I can't believe I brought this guy in, or he's too coarse for my sensibilities. Sort of like people said about George Patton or Curtis LeMay after the war was over and their utility was over.
I was around at the birth of the Tea Party. I was living in Delaware at the time, and not long after it was birthed, a fellow named Will Bunch, who was a liberal writer from Philadelphia, paid me a visit, and he wrote a book about the movement. I think he called it The Backlash. But he interviewed me and a number of other people who had been there in the early days. I have seen the progression of that movement, and while it's not called Tea Party any longer, I thought that essentially what you were seeing is it resulted in that election of Donald Trump. And I think that writing the movement off in 2012 was probably a little premature. Would that be related to?
Yeah, I think you're right. I do. And I think that if you look at 2020, where people are forgotten nothing and they've learned nothing, the same forces that were successful for Trump are starting to repeat themselves. And by that I mean that the agenda of the progressives is now the Democratic agenda. It's likely that whatever candidate they nominate will be as polarizing as Hillary Clinton. And I think the Republican Party is more united than it was in 2016 as far as raising money and things. And Trump's, unless we have a recession or a war, I don't see that happening, but he has a record to run on. And yet people think that Trump is going to be easily defeated. And yet when you look historically, he's right at where Obama and Clinton were as far as popularity in the beginning of their third year. He did better than both in the midterm elections in the Senate and the House when they were up for referendum in 1994 and 2010, and then they both easily won. I mean, Clinton beat Dole pretty easy, and so did Obama when he defeated Romney. So I don't quite get the impression that they're going to defeat Trump. Incumbents anyway don't lose very often unless there's a depression or an unpopular war or a Watergate. I don't see any of these ingredients there in Trump's future. So I think it's his election to win or lose.
I don't mean to throw a curveball or change the subject too much. We've got just a couple of minutes to go. There's that old line about 6 degrees of separation. You referenced General LeMay. I have a friend, he's retired from the Air Force, and he retired, he finished out his duty as the administrator of the Shuttle Challenger Commission, but he had known LeMay when LeMay was alive. And just the other day, I got an email from my friend that he said he had signed up for the Hillsdale course on the Second World Wars. And I said, interestingly enough, I'm talking to Professor Hanson later this week, and so he was very interested in that. But for people who, on the other book, the success of that was just amazing. And this course being offered by Hillsdale, I assume, is to try to bring people up to speed, a new generation that don't necessarily have an understanding of some of our past.
Yeah, I did. And, Curtis LeMay was caricatured because he ran with George Wallace, 1968, and then he was the character for 2 fictional characters in Dr. Strangelove. But people forget that in 1945, the B-29 program had cost more than the Manhattan Project that created the atomic bomb, and it had completely failed. It had no results as a high-altitude bomber, and he took enormous risk in radically changing the tactics and the training of B-29 crews and sent them in at 6,000 feet on the jet stream. And the result was that in 90 days, he burned down 75% of the industrial capacity of Japan. And we would have likely, even had we not dropped the bomb, I don't think, invaded Japan, because he was assembling a huge force of idle bombers from the European theater. And he had planned to use Okinawa, which was only 350 miles away, as a new base. So he was a very effective, as was George Patton. And yet the way they talked, the way they looked, their bluntness, after the war was over, people said, well, gee, I can't believe this guy was a hero. But during the war, they were on the cover of Time magazine as irreplaceable.
Before we wrap up, just for anybody who might like to get a copy of The Case for Trump, I assume it's available at all the usual booksellers.
It is. It's Barnes & Noble especially, and then Amazon, and I have a website, victorhanson.com. You can click onto it there if you wish.
Well, I thank you so very much for your time, and I enjoy reading everything, and I was telling somebody today you're the most prolific writer I think I'm aware of today, and look forward to reading a lot more.
Well, thank you. Appreciate that.
Have a great day, sir.
You too.
Bye-bye now.